Brews and Banner Podcast. Brews and Banner Podcast. What up? Welcome to Brews and Banner Podcast. I'm your host, Rob G. And with me, as always, is the Legendary Brew Crew. What up, fellas?
I got water, I got, juice or whatever. It's like, y'all need twin legs? Matter of fact, I do.
My question to everybody is, does Delaware have an actual culture? This is the podcast that we talk about beer, but we also talk about a lot of things that's happening in the world, politics, movies, anything really that comes to our mind while we're here sampling these brews. Grab a drink and pull up a chair. Welcome to Brews and Banter Podcast, where the topic be the rocket and the brew will have be the fuel. And I'm your host, Rob G. And with me, as always, the Legendary Brew Crew. What up, fellas?
What's up, Rob?
What
Lou,
is going on,
Yoda.
everyone?
Hi.
How's everybody?
Good.
Hi.
On this beautiful Sunday.
Hello.
This is episode 72.
Two.
Yeah, episode 72. Yeah, right?
It was 71 for some
Right in there. 72.
Okay.
Yeah, 72. I'm right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
because
right.
71 was last week. Today's 72. He got me the question.
I know. Just like all the days been running into each other. I'm confused.
All episodes too.
Yeah, everything's just going together.
Yeah, man.
I hear you.
This is episode 72, as I said, of Brews and Banter Podcast. And this week, we have a special guest again. We have Neil Witte, Master Cicerone, and owner of Craft Quality Solutions. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, it's fun. Always a good time talk with people about beer, hang out a little bit. Holiday weekend.
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy Memorial Day to everybody. Oh,
Yes.
it'll be already past when it dropped, but
Yes.
I hope you had a good
And safe.
Memorial Day, and it's safe, exactly.
Yes.
Keep on social distancing. Keep your mask on if you have to, if you need to, if you're in the
And
space
wash
that.
them.
Absolutely, wash your hands, and also reflect on the actual Memorial Day and what it means, and you took the time to remember the people who have fought and died for the country, for sure, and all of that stuff. All right. I always need to know before we get into it. I always need to know, what are we drinking today, fellas? Neil, we can start with you. What are you drinking today?
I am drinking a Hands Brewing Company Incarnation IPA.
Nice.
Hands is a small brewer out of St. Louis. So they're not 100% local to me, but they're local enough. I consider them local. They're really good people. They're just right across the state. I try to buy their beer as much as possible. Good stuff. I'm drinking, by the way, out of my Cicerone glass.
Nice.
Show off. Yeah. Humble brag.
Yeah.
Dev, what you got?
I am actually double fisting it today, but the first can I cracked is a True Respite from Firm Brewing Company. This is their first pitch IPA, coming in at 6.5% alcohol by volume. It's got a lot of good hops mixed in there that we'll get into.
Is that
later.
Phillies inspired, Dev? With the first?
That may be a reference that I'm not sure about, Lou. You may have just a little bit more of baseball knowledge than me to know if that's Phillies.
It seemed like anytime it's baseball and they use a PH, it's kind of like Phillies centric. It just made me think of it when I don't know by looking at it.
They're out of Durwood, Maryland, so not exactly sure, but there could be some lineage there. And then the other IPA that I'm drinking is actually a brewery that we all know is 2SP Brewing Company. This is their Regrets IPA, brewed 100% with Citra and Mosaic, coming in at 7% ABV. So I'm living and feeling good over here.
That one must be extra bitter for them to call it that.
We'll see. I haven't cracked it just yet. I'm about to. And
what's the IBU on it, Dev?
This one, the ABV is 7, but let me just see if it has the IBU on it. I don't think
it might not have the IBU. Most of the time,
it doesn't have it on there.
They don't.
And they're out of Aston, PA, so right in my backyard from where I grew up.
All right, yo, what you got?
So what I got is, for the sake of the podcast, I pulled out my Mosaic Man. So we had this before. This is from Glasstown Brewing Company out of Millville, New Jersey. But so this is what I'm drinking for the IPA for the podcast. But I don't really want it because I didn't want to drink an IPA. So on the side also, I'm drinking my blackberry vanilla from Wilmington Brew Works too. So
that milkshake sour, right?
Yeah, that's that milkshake sour. And that's a 6%, John. And that was candy yesterday.
Ooh.
Nice.
Nice and fresh.
Supporting those local breweries. Love it.
Yeah.
So I'm double fisting it too.
Double fisting too. Good, good.
You guys know how to do it, man.
Yes.
Lou, what you got?
I too am double fisting because it's IPA day, which means it's not my day. So I called on brother Rob G to go to his home brewery and give me the Biggie Smalls IPA out of Bellefronte Brewery, local. It's a 6.5 ABV in a pint can. And because I like sours and I still have some left over from Cinco de Mayo, Tequila Barrel Lime Gose Sour Ale from Boulevard Brewing.
That's your chaser.
The back, that'll be on the back.
Yeah, that's mine.
That's my hometown beer.
There you go. Yeah.
Is it nice?
Yeah.
Boulevard is. Yep, it sure is.
That's where I worked for those guys for 19 years.
Oh,
there it is. And because Neil's on the show, I went ahead.
That's not
You got that, right? Yep.
Yeah.
I'm helping you out here.
Look how that worked out. Stars aligned.
If you would have started with that, we'd have believed you. We like,
right, yeah.
Right. You know what, Lou? I believe you because that thing was perfect. That was impeccable.
What you got, Rob?
I'm drinking for Wilmington Brew Works as well. It's called Sartorial Absence. It's a 9.2% ABV. It is a Imperial New England IPA. So it is a Wilmington Brew Works crowler.
And that's 9.2?
Yeah, which is the Imperial of it.
So you're drinking a crowler of 9.2% beer.
And he's hosting his podcast.
1 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's right.
I stand.
I'm here to have a good time.
Right. No work tomorrow. You got work. You off tomorrow.
Right.
Tomorrow.
Right. Exactly. And I'm already home, so it's not like I got to go anywhere.
Right.
Exactly. That's true.
There's benefits of quarantine. You're already home.
Right. Give me some more.
All right.
Definitely.
I only have one beer, so these guys might equal mine once they're done.
Yep. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
According to Devin's math, we probably got more than you.
Yeah. There you go.
I like Devin's math. Just add them up.
Add them up. Add them ABVs up.
Right. I feel like I don't have enough beer with me now compared to all you guys
gotta go.
Oh, Neil, we know you got enough beer.
Yeah. Hang out with us a little bit more often.
Yeah, it's just not in front of you right now.
Right, yeah.
I'm surprised none of y'all asked me what that song was.
Yo, because it was just the vibe, so we didn't even worry about it. What was the song?
It was back up if it were real summertime.
Well, no, it was me and my son, we play Just Dance 2020 all the time, and that's like my favorite dance on this.
Okay. So that beat that comes up on there, and y'all be getting it in.
It's called Maito, and she's like she's Nigerian, but she grew up in Norway or something like that. She's Nigerian, but grew up in Norway.
What's the style of music?
It sounds like Afro,
it's like Afro world.
Afro
world. But she also raps in there, but I don't think I got to that part. But she actually pretty dope.
Is it in English or is it in?
She flips back and forth. The raps are in English, but the hook and stuff is in I guess
Singing the melodies.
As in Nigerian or I don't know if Nigerian is the language, but the language that people of Nigeria speak.
Right. We know what you're talking
about.
Right.
I just like the flow. The vibe is real dope on the record and the dance.
It felt real islandy when you played it.
Right. Well, so shout out to Versus then.
I thought you was playing it for Deb's hat after he said it was a island hat.
I guess I could have went with some Beanie Man or some Bounty Killer, but
I didn't watch it, but
it was actually pretty dope. I mean, it was dope because they were both in there together, so they were really beat.
Oh, they were together. Okay.
Yeah, they were together.
Okay,
that's good. Yeah,
I have to check it out. It's on YouTube now.
Yeah, and they were freestyling like they did 4 records that wasn't even. They were just freestyling over the beat. I was like, oh, this is the vibe. Yeah. And people at Jamaica was going crazy.
I bet they was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like we have some good beers today, but we want to jump into our conversation with Neil. And basically, you can just tell us who you are, what you do, how long you've been doing it, and just the whole bio and how I'm gonna run down, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I got introduced to some of you guys through a class I just did. I guess what was that, in March now, I guess, or early April?
March.
Through Black Brew Culture.
Right.
Mike and that.
Shout out to Mike.
Over there. Yep. Shout out to Mike. I currently do a lot of work with Cicerone certification program. So that was what that class was. We Cicerone certification program had, just before this whole coronavirus thing hit, worked out an arrangement to do quarterly classes for Black Brew Culture. So I had a flight booked and everything. I was going to go fly out there and do an in-person class.
Oh, wow.
And then, of course, that all got canceled when everything shut down. And then, Mike and I kept talking, and he's like, hey, let's do this thing via webinar. And that actually allowed him to open it up to a broader audience. So I think we had like 100 people sitting in on that class. It was really cool.
Yeah, I know for sure there was one person from in the Netherlands, I believe.
Oh, yeah? Was there?
Really?
Yeah. Because Chris was on there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Across TV.
Yeah. And, there was one woman from LA who, was sending me some messages. I've hooked up with a bunch of really cool people through this. It's been awesome. So, I mean, yeah, that's a lot of what I do right now is work with Cicerone certification program. If you're not familiar with Cicerone certification program, we certify beer knowledge, and we have a series of examinations that are increasingly difficult, as you might imagine. So think of it like if you're familiar with a sommelier program for wine, like if you go to a nice restaurant and like white tablecloth, fine dining or whatever, they'll often have
a butler,
a sommelier. Where you got exactly.
But he comes with the glass.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. You know the whole thing.
Not a port.
Yeah, the sommelier will walk you through the menu to explain the wines and and try and help you pick something out that'll go with your food, right? So, and the sommelier program has different levels of examination. So to certify knowledge for people who are serving wine, well, we kind of do the same thing for beer. Okay. And I got hooked up with those guys many years ago when they first started out, back in I think 2007. Mm-hmm. And so I got into the beer business back in '97 as a brewer. I went to Mizzou, right in the middle of the state of Missouri. Go Tigers! And I was a home brewer in the early '90s, and kind of bounced around after school. I studied German and philosophy in college, so naturally I didn't know what the heck I was going to do when I got out of school. And I was bartending and making beer, and got on at a winery where a buddy of mine was a winemaker, doing some stuff, helping him out. And then I got connected with a company in Kansas City, and I moved here to be an assistant brewer at a brew pub. And the work ended up being kind of inconsistent, but after not too long, I got a job as a brewer at Boulevard Brewing Company. And Boulevard Brewing Company now is a pretty big, regional brewer that, I think they probably sell in about 40 states right now. And they're part of a larger company. They're part of Duvel USA. So Duvel's a big Belgian brewer that bought them back in, I think, 2014. In any event, I got on with them in 97 as a brewer. And after about 3 years of working for them as a brewer, they transitioned me into a new position where I was managing the quality of the beer out in the marketplace. So I was working with all our distributors and retailers and our sales team on all the things that come up with beer after it leaves the brewery, which is all kinds of different stuff. But a large part of that is draft beer. And so, I spent the next 16 years really just specializing in draft beer and draft beer systems. I did everything from, auditing systems to working with draft techs and line cleaners out in the marketplace, training them, making sure they're doing it the right way, working with installers, installing systems myself on behalf of Boulevard, and doing all kinds of different stuff. And it evolved into kind of a training role too, where ended up because if you're talking to people about quality, like if you're going into a bar and you want to talk to a group of bartenders about how to pour a beer the right way, I mean, you guys know what bartenders are like. If you go and try and tell a bartender how to pour a beer, they're gonna be like, come on, man, like I know how to pour beer. But so if you want to explain to them why the finer points of pouring a beer are important, why they should listen to you, you kind of have to explain a little bit about beer in general, like, and teach them about beer, like here's why it's important. And so my job evolved into more of a beer educational role too. And then when we became part of Duvel in 2014, I took over that role for the larger company. So we had a few sister breweries at that point. Brewery Omegang out of Cooperstown, New York, if you're familiar with them. They specialize in Belgian-style beers.
What's the name of it? What's their name?
Brewery Omegang.
Yeah, Omegang, gang. We had a lot of their beers.
Omni Gang.
We have been calling Omni Gang, but how's it pronounced correctly?
Omegang.
Omegang. Well, there we go.
Omegang.
Yeah. We used to call the people who work there the Omegangsters.
They make one of our favorite. They're one of our favorite breweries on the podcast.
They do make some good beers.
Yeah, they do. They do a really fantastic job. Some of their big sellers are there's a beer called Witte, which is spelled the same as my last name. I pronounce it Witty. They call it Witte, but it's a Belgian wit beer. Really, really good beer. They also do a saison called Hennepin, which is real popular. They do a beer called Three Philosophers, which is a big Belgian quad that's got a little bit of a Leafman's cherry beer blended in with it. It's really fantastic.
Sounds good.
So we became kind of sister breweries with them. And then I was also helping out with, we had a bunch of imported beers that we managed as well. So we had Duvel, if you're familiar with that, Belgian strong golden ale, really fantastic beer. One of my favorite beers in the world. Just absolutely love that beer. The beers of Schoof. So if you see the gnome behind me back over here, that's the Schoof gnome. If you ever had La Schoof, the little gnome is great. I got the little guy right here. This is Marcel, the Schoof gnome. So if you get a Schoof beer, you'll see that little gnome on every can or package. Yeah, that's right. They make Belgian golden ale too. They do a really great job. Nice. And then Leafman's, they make sour fruit beers. They're from Belgium. They've been around since the 1600s.
Oh, wow.
Historic brewery. It's a really amazing place. So, I did a lot of education for those guys too when we became part of that larger group. I stayed with them when we became part of Duvel for another 3 years. And so after 19 years working with them, I left and kind of did my own thing. I started Craft Quality Solutions, where I was taking kind of that same work that I was doing and kind of providing it to the larger industry, so still working with distributors, retailers, but I was also working with other breweries too. So I do any number of different types of work, from consulting to draft system design and installation, working with draft departments for distributors, all kinds of different stuff. And at the same time, I took on a larger role at Cicerone. So I circle back around to what I was talking about with how I got involved with those guys. Since I was working as a field quality manager, doing a lot of education and doing a lot of work at retail, when I heard about the Cicerone program starting, I was like, hey, this sounds like something the industry needs, some type of certification of knowledge to say, hey, I know at least this much about beer. So I went ahead and dove in and did it. And I was one of the first people to really go through the program. I took certified beer server, and then in April of 2008, I sat for the very first certified Cicerone exam. That was out in Craft Brewers Conference when it was in San Diego that year. So I was one of the first 5 certified Cicerones. And at that point, nobody knew who it was. It was just this, it was just this kind of fledgling program that Ray Daniels was trying to grow. But, it ended up turning into something pretty significant, which is kind of cool. And so I worked my way through and ended up taking Master Cicerone in that following year in 2009. I failed. And then I went back and I took it again in 2010, and I failed it again. And then I decided to take a year off and really study the stuff I needed to study. And then I went back in 2012 and I passed it. Just barely, but nonetheless.
Right, you passed.
You passed.
Yeah.
Nobody
what's that?
No one asked you what your score was. They just see the badge.
It's pass or fail, isn't it? Or is it? Is it
Well,
score?
you get a score, yeah.
You do?
But no, nobody's going to ask you after you see. They see
right after you get it right.
Yeah.
Well, what was your score?
They don't post the score on the
unless they're
certificate.
petty. Unless they're petty.
They're petty, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
I'll
pretty
just
sure
tell you right up front, I barely passed. I don't mind telling
Just
you.
cut that out. Just cut that out of the conversation quickly.
Yeah, but nonetheless, right? So they still gave me the certificate. It's right there. So.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Like,
so
well, I'm a master Cicerone too, but what was your score?
So you've been a part of the Cicerone program's only been around since 2008, and you've basically been a part of the program since inception.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't working for them and doing work for them right off the bat, but by the time I passed Master Cicerone, and I think maybe for like a year or two before I passed, I had started to help them with grading exams and just doing a few things kind of on the side. And then after I left Boulevard at the end of 2016, I took on a larger role. So I don't work there full time, but I do about half-time work, and I'm their lead trainer. So I do all the private training for them. If a distributor or a brewer wants to bring us in to do private training for like a sales team or something, I'm usually the guy that does that. And I help them with content development and a bunch of other stuff as well. So, I've been doing that. That's been a large part of what I've been doing in the past few months because, my own business is very dependent on the on-premise business, right? It's dependent on bars and restaurants and brewery tap rooms, and those are all closed right now. So, things been a little slow for me, like everybody else, but I've been doing still cranking away with Cicerone. And for the past few years as well, I was doing a lot of work with the Brewers Association, which is the trade group for craft brewers. And I was the quality ambassador for the BA, so I would travel around the state Brewers Guild meetings around the country and talk to them about quality programs and some hot button issues around quality inside the brewery.
Okay. Hey, Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so are you like the John Tapper or Gordon Ramsay of draft systems? You go in there and be like, this is
I don't know if I'm not going to compare myself to those guys. I hope not. Although I was the beer expert on an episode of Bar Rescue one time.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
if you're flipping through old Bar Rescue episodes, you might see me on there.
I love that show, so I probably saw it.
I'm about to say, what episode was it? I'm pretty sure I saw it.
It was, I forget the name of it. It was, I think the episode was called Loggers and Liars.
Ooh.
And it was in LA. So we went out to LA, and it was this bar that was obviously in terrible shape. You know, that's why they go to these places, because they're really
right.
And it was one of these beer bars that had like, I don't know, 100 taps, but they were only really serving like maybe 15 beers off of it. And the guy was like, you know, $1 million in debt, and was like, you know, sucking money off of his family's business to stay afloat. It was a total disaster. And, you know, and of course Taffer comes in and does his thing and yells and screams, and, you know.
Right.
Is the bar still running?
The what?
You know,
Is it still running?
If your advice and it's still up and running?
I don't think they made it. Yeah, it was a tough. That was a tough.
The tough turnaround.
A lot of those bars, they don't make it even after he comes in. And
yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee those places are going to make it, but you know, I mean, they certainly get a better chance to make it than they would have.
Yeah, just the marketing, the publicity, those kinds of things.
Yeah, they get that, and you know, the show does spend money to, you know,
do it.
Right.
They buy them equipment sometimes, and they like redo the interior a lot of times, and I mean, they do pump some cash into those places and give them a second chance. But you know, a lot of times these people don't have any business being in the bar business anyway. So.
Especially with 100 taps, like what the hell?
Yeah.
Neil, I got a question.
Yeah.
The Cicerone class that you offer, and obviously like a form of education for people, would you recommend this as a class for people who are getting into craft beer more from a service standpoint, or would you say that it's really kind of a base knowledge for the average participant, just kind of learning the characteristics of a beer? What would you say that, you know, kind of that, how did you corner the market, or what do you think is beneficial between those two?
Well, you know, I think really, especially for a certified beer server, the class that like the one that I taught for Black Brew Culture, and you know, in that certified beer server class and exam, that's good for just about anybody, right? So when we call it certified beer server, because it's, you know, its original intent was for the person who's serving beer, but we have a lot of people sit in on these types of classes who are just beer fans. You know, they really like beer, they want to learn more about beer, they want to kind of set a goal for studying, and you know, these exams are a great way to set goals for learning. And there's a lot of people. I mean, you know, I've got a friend who works in like insurance investigations, and he just likes beer, and he's a certified beer server, you know, and he sat in on you know, on one of the 4-hour classes that we do these public classes called Beer Savvy Boot Camp. And it's just, we've got people that do those all over the country, at least when, you know, when we're not under quarantine. And it's a great kind of 4-hour just general beer education course, and it's a preparatory class for taking certified beer server class, of course, taking that exam. And we get a lot of people who are in the business. We get a lot of people who are just beer enthusiasts, that they just want to learn more about beer. So it's great like that. And we get some people who do certified Cicerone, that level 2, who are just, you know, fans of beer and don't work in the business. That's a little bit bigger commitment for somebody who doesn't have a professional investment. But there's no reason why you couldn't, you know. It's just a matter of how much you really want to like dive into it. Most of the people who have who really have the time to invest into that level of education to pass certified Cicerone are people who are already professionally invested.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be. But we see a lot more, especially in that first level of the just beer enthusiasts, people who like beer.
Yeah, I like to use mine for dinner parties. Oh, that's a toasty toasty.
Right. You know what? That's good conversation. That's great conversation, actually. Not good, but great.
Do you taste
Absolutely.
that resin in there? That's from the hop. That's the American hop. And the resin you taste in?
2017.
Yo, but Rob been a beer snob since we started
this.
That's false. I just was talking about the beer clean glass. That was the only thing.
We was like beer clean
just
glass.
for the people that don't know, what are the levels of Cicerone of training?
Sure, we've got so the examinations are certified beer server exam, and that's a half-hour online exam. There's 60 questions. It takes it takes half hour to take the test. Preparation depends on how much you know already, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's some people who already work in the business who might be able to just jump right in and pass it. Maybe not. Most people require a little bit of preparation. The certified Cicerone exam is level 2. That's an in-person 4-hour exam. There's a 2-hour written portion. It's actually 2.5-hour written portion with a short answer, multiple choice, essay questions. There's a tasting portion of the exam with off flavor identification, style identification. And then there's a videotape portion where you have a task that you have to perform in front of a camera.
What?
And so that's a pretty difficult exam. And we usually encourage people to study for at least 3 months. Most people take 6 months or more to prepare for that exam and pass it. Passing rate I think is under 40% on that exam, so it's a tough exam.
That was the first level, right? That's the only. I'm at the second level.
That's level 2. Yeah. That's certified Cicerone.
Oh, that's just.
So you said 40%. So 40% of the people that take level 2 pass it and to move on.
I think it's less than 40. Yeah.
Less than 40. Wow.
Yeah.
Y'all taking level 2?
Get to studying, Rob.
Level 1. I'm gonna stick with
Rob. You gonna take level 2?
We'll see.
Hey,
Bill just scared the hell out of y'all, didn't he? Like,
but part of it's the journey, right?
For the CBS.
I worked with some folks at Boulevard, and I did a big push at Boulevard years ago to get a bunch of folks on the sales team to take and pass certified Cicerone. And there were some people that that I didn't think really were cut out for it. They just weren't the type of people that that were going to do that type of thing. Right. But there were some folks that really studied hard and, worked their butt off and studying, and they took the test and failed. And they're like, I'm not going to do it anymore. But after that, they were like, you know what? I learned so much in that process, right? And even if you set that as a goal, and even if you never take the exam, or if you take it and you fail it, it's the process that's important, because even to get to the point where you feel confident enough to sit for that exam, you've learned so much about beer.
That's right.
Sure.
The certification is a great thing to have, especially if you're in the beer business. But it's not, it's the process. It's learning more about beer and educating yourself. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about.
You can talk, but you can talk more crap with it than you can without it. when you go
you can, you got a little bit of the credentials to back it up, That's right.
So when you walk into a tap room, do people get scared? They be like, "Oh my goodness, the Master Cicerone is here." Oh my God.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have had some people react kind of strangely, at a beer fest. I'll try their beer. They're like, "Oh, I'm so nervous." I'm like, "Don't be nervous. I'm just here to try beer, man."
Right. At the end of the day, you enjoy beer.
I enjoy beer just like everybody else.
It's like a foodie, Yeah.
Right. But it's like a low. How many people are actually Master Cicerone? It's like a low double-digit number, right?
There's 19 people.
19 people.
19 people. So wait. So you 1 out of 19 people. So the thing is that of course I would be nervous if you came up to take my
Yeah, and everybody knows. Everybody
you don't have to be nervous,
has
man.
to know you.
It's just me. It's cool.
Nah.
I know Neil.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
I'm about to start using Neil credentials. I'm gonna be at a beer fest and be like, oh no, you do know I know Neil, right? Before I taste this. You do know.
Neil Witte. In my contacts, in my Rolodex.
Are you sure this is the best? Are you sure
That's
this is
number right here. I'll send you all my phone number, my email. We'll all be friends.
And I'll be like, look, okay, you sure this is your best?
I will
I don't think
right now.
Hey, you call me up, and if it works, if it helps you out at some point, you need to give me a call. That's cool, man.
Well, Neil, continue with the levels. We're at level 2, and I gotta get to this 19. How it's only 19 of y'all. What's after level 2?
Well, so after level 2 is the advanced Cicerone. So advanced Cicerone is a day-long exam. That's
8 hours.
Yeah, it's a full.
That's what I'm about to say, because 8 hours is like a work day. So
yeah, it's a full day. It's a full day exam, and it's written portion, which is essay questions, short answer. There's oral examinations where you're going into and talking with people in person and getting drilled on different topics, and then there's 2 tasting portions.
yeah.
So that's a very difficult exam. I think we've got around 130 people who have passed that one.
Okay.
Can you just jump to the test? Can I just jump to like the 3rd level? Or
no, you have to take them in order.
Progression.
Okay.
Yep. And then there's Master Cicerone. Master Cicerone is a 2-day exam, so it's 2 full days of essay questions. It's all essay questions. They're essay questions, oral exams, and tasting exams. So there's 4 tasting exams. I think there's like 8 oral exams, and the rest is just essay questions. It's really, really, really hard.
So when you say tasting exam, is it like the sommelier tasting exam where you got to name like the hop and
they set it up in a number of different ways. Like there's off flavor identification, and it's some really obscure off flavors. There's some of the stuff is more open-ended too, where you'll get a beer and it's more just relying on you coming up with good descriptors and talking about the beer. Describing it, talking about how what food you might pair with it, stuff like that. There's a number of different ways we can get different feedback from you about different beers. But
so are these other master Cicerones that are giving this testing?
Yeah, we employ a lot of master Cicerones to help out with the examination process.
Because I was going to say, how you going to tell me this is wrong and you ain't even
Well, I mean, we also get a lot of experts in the industry who come in to help out with those oral exams too. Like we've gotten master brewers from a lot of big breweries come in to help out with some of these oral exams. People who specialize in like chefs and brewmasters will come in and do beer and food oral exams. We get experts in the field to come in and assist with it, in addition to master Cicerones as well. Okay. So we've got professionals in the field for sure that already kind of have those credentials, whether it's master Cicerone or some other credential that are helping out with that stuff.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people ask this, like, what does Cicerone even mean?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The name comes from Marcus Aurelius Cicero from years ago, but the name Cicerone had been used for a long time to denote someone who was like a guide, like a museum guide. So like a Cicerone would be somebody who would walk you through the museum, and they'd be able to educate you about all of the different things in the museum. It's kind of an antiquated term that nobody was really using, at least not in this country. And when Ray Daniels, the founder of the program, was researching it and trying to find a name, he just felt like that was a good fit and appropriate. And so that's where the name comes from.
Right. So it's not Cicerone. It's not Cicerone like they do on that
Cicerone,
dumb show.
like-
Cicerone.
That dumb show, Netflix show.
Yeah.
Have you watched Blues Brothers, Neil?
Yeah, it's not in the United States. We don't call it that.
Oh, that's what they was calling it on Bruise Brothers.
Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
Have you watched that show, Blues Brothers, on Netflix?
The Bruise Brothers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I haven't watched that. I've been advised not to.
Yeah.
That means watch it. Watch it. When they say you don't watch it, watch it.
I don't know, man. Yeah, it sounds pretty
Don't open that envelope.
It's so stupid.
Hey Neil, what is like the best thing that being a Cicerone has given you? Like, what different credentials have you gotten into? Or what different beers have you been able to taste? Or what has like, oh, I'm a master Cicerone, this is what it's all about. Like, what
VIP,
that stood out to you?
access.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's honestly, especially with Master Cicerone, it's hard to really put my finger on exactly like this. I got this one thing because I'm a Master Cicerone. It's more like I think there's a lot of the things that I've been able to do, a lot of the doors that have been open for me were probably that played a role in it. But it's hard to say exactly because, it does, there are organizations who have been more than willing to have me come and speak to them. There have been plenty of people who have hired me to consult with them or do work for them. And, they might not say, hey, I'm doing this because you're a Master Cicerone. But, I can't help but think that a lot of those opportunities I wouldn't have if I hadn't done that, right? I always tell people like the certified beer server and certified Cicerone, those first two levels of the program are like, there's some pretty clear cut advantages to those as far from a professional standpoint. If you have that on your resume to say I'm a certified Cicerone, that helps you a lot. If you want to get a job as a salesperson at a distributor or a brewery, or you want to get it, or if you want to, manage a beer portfolio for a beer store or whatever, right? You could put that on your resume and it's like, there's some pretty clear cut advantages to that. When you get into advanced and Master Cicerone, I think you get into kind of personal pursuit territory where it's a lot more nebulous what the advantages are. There are advantages, and like I said, but it's a little more squishy. It's hard to like say exactly what that is. And the people who have pursued that and passed those exams, they're just they're people who just want to. They like to pursue things to the end and kind of obsess about knowledge and learning more and more and more and like achieving the pinnacle, and it becomes a little bit more of a personal thing at that point. But there are professional advantages to it. It's just a lot harder to really put your finger on. Yeah, this is exactly why I got this job. So
when you go to like beer conferences, do you feel like Tom Cruise or Michael Jackson?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. No, I mean, at those beer conferences, that's the brewmasters, man. There's a whole bunch of like beer celebrities in the business.
Right. So when you go to those conferences, to that point, even to piggyback off of that, when you go to those conferences, are there anyone at those conferences that you want to kind of, rub elbows with or like meet from that master brewery level, like just being in their presence and learn from them?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people there's plenty of people I've had an opportunity to meet in the business that I've learned a ton from. And there's still plenty of people. I love to meet new people in the business all the time.
Right.
And those conferences are great for that. Another place where I really have an opportunity to connect with people that I've always wanted to meet, but maybe haven't had a chance to interact with is at the Great American Beer Festival, because I judge in that competition every year, and that's a really fantastic opportunity to meet a lot of the people that I've known about and wanted to meet for a long time, kind of luminaries in the industry, people who, you know.
And that's in Colorado, am I right? Or
yeah, they hold that competition in Denver every year, and you know, and they get like 450 or so judges, but it's all professionals from the industry, and it's brewmasters from, you know, all across the industry and beer professionals, and it's kind of like a who's who of the beer business. And, you know, and I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of really cool people through that. But, you know, I've been real fortunate. I mean, I've been in the business for a really long time, and I've been very fortunate to be able to already meet a lot of the people who I would consider to be, you know, some of my idols in the business, you know, and interact with them. Just, you know, and just get to know some really fantastic folks and some super smart people. So yeah, it's, I don't know if that quite answers your question, but.
No, it does. I mean, you know, you're definitely, you know, knowledgeable when you mentioned, hey, look, you want to rub elbows or be around at least like-minded people that are trying to, you know, be great like you. So yeah, that's awesome.
I got a question for you, Neil. What's with the IPAs?
What's with the IPAs?
Like, why do we all have IPAs right now?
Well, you know, Lou was talking with Lou and I were kind of going back and forth a little bit about beers, what should we taste, whatever. And, you know, I felt like the reason why I brought up IPA was because it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? Everybody's making IPAs. And that's, and it kind of brings it back to what your local brewery is probably making right now, right? So, you know, with quarantine and shutdown and you know, the business hurting so much right now, bars and restaurants closing, you know, we've had basically the on-premise, all the bars and restaurants is dried up, that part of the business. And there's a lot of people that are hurting right now. A lot of small businesses hurting right now. A lot of bar and restaurant owners, brewery tap rooms, they're really struggling. And so I felt like a good beer, I felt like, well, let's just get a beer from a local brewer that needs our support. And what's the easiest style to find from a local brewer? It's probably an IPA. So if we all got IPAs, support local business, support small businesses that need help right now, then, you know, that would be kind of a good, you know, why not that as opposed to anything else? So that was kind of my thought about that. You know, IPA is a broader topic. I mean, we could talk about that for a long time. It's a beer with a rich history in England, and Americans have kind of taken that style and made it their own. And now it's like it's grown into, with all these different branches, into a whole myriad of styles that many of which aren't even anything like the other anymore.
Right. So with the I mean, y'all may know this too, but IPAs probably have the most styles of any other type of beer, huh?
Well, there are a lot of
what New England IPAs, West Coast IPAs, American IPAs.
Yeah, you got black IPA, white IPA, red IPA, depending on the organization whose guidelines you're looking at.
Right.
Yeah, there's been session IPA, and the New England hazy IPA, West Coast IPA, East Coast IPA, English IPA. So I mean, yeah, there's a ton. You could also, I mean, the only other style that comes to mind with as many subcategories might be stout beer.
Okay, right. Oh yeah.
There's a ton of subcategories for stout beer as well. But yeah, I mean, IPA, I mean, as originally, I mean, I remember when I got in the business, there was only one beer out there that you could really consider to be an IPA that you could get, and that was Anchor Liberty Ale. Anchor Liberty was like the only beer up until probably the early 2000s. That was what IPA was.
Is that beer still available?
Yeah, you could still get Anchor Liberty. I haven't had one forever. I should get one and see kind of how it stacks up to modern IPA.
Now that's in San Francisco, right? That's the San Francisco brewery?
Yeah, that's right. They're out of San Francisco. They're more known for Anchor Steam, obviously.
Right.
But, you know, in the early mid-2000s, American craft brewers started to make lots of versions of it. And so the initial IPAs just had like a lot of what we call in the industry C hops, which are like Cascade, Centennial, Columbus, Chinook, all these hops that start with C, but they also share a lot of similarities. They have aromas like pine needle and citrus, and they can be kind of resiny, and they're all very similar in that manner. They share a lot of similar descriptors, and a lot of those early IPAs had some pretty prominent malt characteristics as well. So they had a good caramel, kind of toasty malt flavor, typically with big bitterness and that kind of C hop aroma, that kind of citrusy, piney aroma. And they weren't really necessarily dry hopped beers initially. So dry hopping is where you take hops and you put them in the fermenter. Hops traditionally are put in the kettle during the boil when you're making beer. And aroma additions tend to boil away a lot of those aromas, even when you put those hops in at the end of the boil. So that traditional aroma addition gives you some aroma, but it's not super intense. Putting hops in the fermenter allows you to get really big, fresh aromas that aren't boiling away because you're not boiling. So, you know, a lot of those early IPAs weren't dry hops. So you got some big aromas, but they weren't crazy. It was more about the bitterness. And in the mid 2000s, there was this almost like an arms race of bitterness. Like, I can make a more bitter beer than you can. And it was like,
right, yeah.
There was like all these extreme beers and like a lot of like really crazy beers and a lot of bad beers as well, unfortunately. But everybody kind of settled in and really kind of found a way to make bitter beers beautiful and flavorful and balanced. And then, you know, you start to see some different offshoots. And then there was kind of the West Coast IPA, which really became that kind of benchmark for what American IPA was for a long time. And that's when you start to see a lot of dry hopping taking place, where it was a lot of it was aromas and bitterness, but really de-emphasized malt flavor. So you get a lot of these really dry beers. You know, one of the benchmarks of that particular style for a long time was Sculpin, Ballast Point Sculpin. If you guys ever had that, they're out of San Diego. They were really big, probably, I don't know, around like maybe 2012 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, it's kind of evolved to this kind of New England IPA is really kind of captured a lot of the market of IPA, and that's really pushed the boundary of what IPA is in general, because this New England IPA or hazy IPA de-emphasizes bitterness and puts more emphasis on the aroma. So there's massive dry hopping that gives you big fresh aroma and not a lot of bitterness, and they're bringing back the sweetness. So there's more malt flavor, there's more sweetness, less bitterness, and these huge hop aromas on top. So a lot of them are like kind of use hop aromas or hops that feature aromas that are really citrusy or maybe even tropical fruit.
And then, are they putting these hops in there later on? Is this like when they're putting the hops later in the process?
Yeah, that's right. That's that dry hopping, the dry hopping where they're putting hops in the fermenter after fermentation. Okay. So that's very late in the process. That's right. And that's what gives you that big fresh hop aroma. And so that's kind of what that kind of hazy, juicy IPA is it's all the emphasis is on that dry hopping and on those aroma hops. So it's really kind of pushed the boundary of it. Now, you're seeing all kinds of people push that even further. It's like the more we can make it taste like a glass of orange juice, like,
Right.
like it's almost like I was talking about this with some friends last night. It's almost like there's a continuum now between New England IPA or hazy IPA and fruit juice. So you've got this like continuum of like, is it beer or is it juice? Which,
right.
and like, depending on what you like, I mean, I like a good hazy IPA with, big fresh hop aromas, but I also like to retain some of that beer character as well. But I mean, there's something out there for everybody now. So it's been interesting to watch the development of this style. I'll bring this back into what I'm drinking here. This incarnation from Four Hands out of St. Louis is I think is a little bit more of a throwback to that West Coast IPA, which is it's a little bit more traditional composition of American IPA, which is a little bit drier malt character. There's some sweet toasty flavors in there, but it's not real sweet. It's more dry, but the emphasis is not there. There's a nice prominent bitterness. I tried to look up the IBUs real quick. I didn't dig deep enough, but it doesn't say what the IBUs are on here. But my guess is it's probably around like 75 IBUs, which is, decent amount of bitterness in there. And they use Mosaic hops. So Mosaic is a fairly new hop variety that it's been around for maybe like 6 or 7 years, I want to guess. I might be a little bit off on that. But it's a pretty popular hop. I think, a lot of us probably all of us might have a beer that has Mosaic in it. Actually, several of you mentioned it when we were talking about it at the top of the show. Mosaic, has some citrusy component to it, but it has kind of like a berry-like component. A lot of people, it has like a blueberry kind of aroma and flavor to it. And so, this has got a relatively new hop variety. It's not one of those C hops, but it has that kind of composition of a West Coast IPA. And I think it's a really fantastic beer.
Now the beer I have is super. It is really hazy. And at 9.2, I'm actually starting to feel.
I bet.
Now, is it hazy juicy though, Rob, or is it just? It is juicy.
Yeah, it's juicy. It has Citra, Simcoe, Cascade, and Amarillo, and then it is, and then I guess they say spiked with. I'm assuming that's dry hop with Sultana hops.
Okay.
And then it's brewed with honey as well. So it takes.
That sounds delicious.
It is delicious. There's some sweetness, but there's some bitterness. But I'm definitely starting to feel it.
Your bottom lip is numb. Your bottom lip numb.
I was wondering why he was over there smiling so hard.
He's Ray Charles and everything.
Yeah, one of the cool things I think when you get into double IPAs is when you hit that. To me, when you hit that kind of 8 to 8.5% ABV, that alcohol it acts as almost like a booster of the flavor. Yeah. So it kind of lifts up a lot of the other flavors in the beer, and it gives you this mouthfeel and a boost to the other flavors of the beer that you don't get from lower ABV beers. And so it's one of the things I like about double IPAs. I can't drink too many of them because I like to drink more than one beer. And when I drink, if I'm sitting down with, if I was drinking your 9.5% Crowler, that'd be all I have. That'd be it.
Oh, this is all I'm having this.
Look at him.
Tap out. Go ahead and tap out, Rob. Go ahead and tap out.
No, I'm good. I'm all right. I'm not slurring my words, so I'm straight.
Not yet.
We'll see by the end of this episode.
But my beer.
We've been talking about IPAs, and you said IPAs are always around. But what's your actual favorite style to drink? That
was my next question. Good question, Lou.
Oh, of any style of beer?
Any style. What's your favorite style that you prefer?
I would say my go-to style is probably American Pale Ale.
Yeah, I was gonna say L. I figured, yeah.
Yeah,
Looks like
American
an
Pale
L
Ale.
guy.
Yeah.
Like you know, when I started working at Boulevard Brewing Company, I was, you know, I had long been a fan of Boulevard Pale Ale. Boulevard Pale Ale was modeled after Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which is, you know, I could just drink Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, you know, every day. Like if I had one beer to choose from, I'd probably pick Boulevard Pale Ale. That'd be my desert island beer. That or Duvel. I love Duvel, Belgian Golden Ale. That beer, I can't drink as many of them. It's 8.5%, but it's one of those beers that doesn't taste like it's 8.5%. You know, it's really light in color. It's super dry, crisp, a little bit of hoppiness. Got a really nice floral hop with some kind of fruity esters. Smells kind of like pears.
You said that's a pale ale. That's
this is a Duvel, which is the Belgian Golden Ale.
Golden Ale.
And you drink it and it just goes down so smooth, but it's 8.5%. Oh man,
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I always see it in at the local craft store, but I don't think I ever picked it up. And now I have to go.
Is Duvel spelled Dubell?
Yeah,
one L.
D-U-V-E-L. Yeah,
One L.
D-U-V-E-L.
Yeah.
I see it all the time, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, that ain't local.
Oh yeah, it's from Belgium, but it's really good. It's a classic. They've been making that beer since 1919.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good stuff.
I'm gonna go try it because
That's the golden ale, not the pale ale, right? Golden
Yeah,
ale.
that's the Belgian Golden Ale. Yeah, so that's probably my
Belgian
second favorite beer. But my favorite beer, to answer your question, Lou, is probably Boulevard Pale Ale.
Okay.
So
Way to stay with
Neil,
the home team, Neil. I like that.
yeah. So Neil, I think probably for you, I think I can speak for the four of us as well when it comes to knowing, kind of like wanting to know how things work or how things kind of are made. I think all of us have just kind of that infatuation with why we, you know, kind of entered or got into this beer journey, because we like the different characteristics or want to know kind of the history behind kind of how, you know, things are comprised.
Yeah.
So to that, that, you know, manufacturing is a part of that process with everything that we, you know, we use, everything that we consume and that kind of thing. So you being a master brewer, or actually starting home brewing, that's what I meant to say, starting at home brewing many, many years ago in the 90s, and now seeing where craft brew has kind of evolved. What do you think about, what's your take on like technology that's actually been inserted into the process to make, you know, the right blends and the right the timing of this hop and things like? How do you think that that's either negatively or positively impacted the, you know, the output of beer and making it, you know, better or worse?
That's a cool question. I like that. A friend of mine in the business always says the best brewers use the best technology to make the best beer. And, you know, I think, you know, some of the best brewers I know kind of keep one foot firmly planted in tradition. You know, like Sierra Nevada, for example, still uses whole leaf hops because they just believe in it and it's traditional and they appreciate that. And so there's a respect for tradition there, but they also use all of the best technology to make really amazing beer. And if you look at like the history of beer and the history of brewing since like the Industrial Revolution, you know, all of the improvements in beer, and beer as we know it today wouldn't be like it is if it wasn't for brewers using technology to improve the process and make better beer. That goes all the way back to the Industrial Revolution when, you know, brewers were using steam power to help grow their businesses and make better beer. You know, advances in malting technology allowed us to have a wide variety of different malts available. You know, advances in laboratory technology allow us to make sure beer's not spoiled before we set it out the door. You know, and you know, a lot of that stuff that the big brewers use to make sure that everything is of the highest quality is maybe not necessary to make great beer per se. There's plenty of small brewers out there who just, you know, they've got a brew house, they make beer, they don't have a lot of fancy technology surrounding it, and they're making amazing beer. But as you grow as a business, if you're going to be a big brewer making a bunch of beer and you want to make it consistently, technology is a really important part of that. And I will also say, even those smaller brewers that are making beer on like a 3 or 5 or 7 barrel brew house, and they're just selling everything out of their tap room, all of this stuff they're doing is the result of some technological advance that has been put in place before them. So I mean, it's a critical part of it, and it's an industrial process on a professional level, no matter how big or small. So you're relying on technology. And then I guess if you look at home brewing, you know, the guys who make the best home brew are the ones that usually have a little bit better setup, you know?
Yeah. That question kind of came up because when probably 2014, I got to visit Napa Valley and go through the whole Behringer like history lesson of like how wine used to be made, you know, kind of in the field and the vineyards, and kind of how that process evolved to, obviously it's not made that way anymore. You know, everything is barrels and no one's stomping on grapes the same way as they used to. But that history lesson definitely was, you know, beneficial and actually made you appreciate what goes into how they make a Chardonnay or how they make a Zinfandel or whatever. So just thought, you know, that could, you know, just create some buzz and talking about it as it relates to beer and history and how it evolved. So
yeah, I'm sure technology plays a huge role in large production winemaking as well. I mean, I had worked for a few years at a winery in the late '90s, and you know, we were using in a lot of ways some modern technology to make sure that, you know, we were getting everything right on that.
Everything right.
Yeah.
Not wasting all that.
Exactly.
Now here's the question in terms of just going back to, like, I guess Cicerone and all that stuff, in terms of with the explosion of craft beer in terms of, well, just in popularity in general, but has like food pairing been emphasized more in terms of like the Cicerone program, in terms of that? Because I know a lot of people always ask, so what do you pair with this IPA or this stout? Like, a lot of people do that nowadays. So has that become more pronounced, I guess, than what you do?
Well, yeah. So this one of the areas of study in the Cicerone program is beer and food pairings, and we've put an emphasis on that, you know, to help promote that, because beer rightfully deserves a place at the dinner table. Right. You know, 10 years ago, if you ask the average person, like, if you're going to pair a beverage with your food, most everybody would say it's going to be wine. And wine's great for pairing with all kinds of different foods. Mm-hmm. But nobody would ever think about beer. And you could go to a 4-star restaurant and they've got this huge wine list, and, you know, and a sommelier there to help you pair wine with food. But then you ask them for beer and they've got like Bud Light, Miller Light, and Coors Light, and and stepping up, you know, would be Heineken or something. And, you know, I mean, nothing wrong with those beers, but, you know, that's just not a selection for, you know, for pairing with food. And the industry, I think, has taken some real steps forward in the past decade to put beer at the forefront of pairing and getting people to realize that beer is just as good to pair with food as wine, and oftentimes is better to pair with food than wine, because it has characteristics that wine doesn't, which can be very beneficial for certain types of foods. Things like carbonation, for example. And so, you know, holding beer dinners is a commonplace event now, where you didn't used to see that.
Right.
But in recent years, I mean, there's beer dinners all over the place now. If a place has got several, if you got a dozen beers on tap, which is, a ton of places now, they're probably holding a beer dinner at some point if they, and so it's really become more commonplace now, and it's been a positive development because, beer has just as much variety and sophistication as wine does, and there's no reason why we can't be pairing beer with food too.
All right.
Awesome.
I agree.
I have a question for you, Neil. You spoke earlier about going to college. You majored or minored in German. Does that ever help, or has that ever helped with your beer journey?
Well, if we were talking about German beer styles, if you remember, we were talking about that in the class. I emphasized the German vocabulary words, right?
Right.
Start like most of the things is like more like a V sound instead of like I think we were saying like Hefeweizen, but it was like it was.
The W is pronounced as a V sound, like a Weizen, like it's spelled W-E-I-Z-E-N. Weizen.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it does help a little bit. I mean, there's times when some terminology pops up. Admittedly, I'm pretty rusty. I graduated from college. I'm gonna date
in the
myself
90s.
now. I graduated from college in '93, so I'm a little rusty.
When you take a deep breath before you say when you graduated, it's been a long time. You're like, you
and in that vein, I know you've tasted so many different beers. Is there a particular country that stands out? Like, this country makes the best beer? Is it Germany? Is it Belgium?
Oh,
is it the U.S.? Like,
it's so hard to say. The countries of focus that we talked about in the class. I mean, we focused on German and Czech styles. From that region, we focused on UK styles, American styles, and Belgian styles. I think there's something I like about each one of those. One of the things I really like about German styles is just lager beer. The best lagers in the world are coming from Germany, and arguably from the Czech Republic too. They have these styles that they really focus in on, and they've refined these styles over centuries, and just amazing focus of the brewing tradition there. I think Belgium is maybe some of the most interesting beers that you can get. They almost defy classification, and they've got such an amazing beer culture there. And this kind of ties in with the discussion of beer and food. Their culture sees beer as being just a part of its culinary culture. So like beer and food just naturally go together. Like any restaurant you go to in Belgium, there's a beer list, and they present the beer list much like a fine restaurant in the United States would present a wine list. Right. And it's so embedded in their culinary culture that it's an amazing thing to see, and it's hard to even explain without you going there and experiencing it yourself. It's a really great place to visit and to immerse yourself into a beer culture, and to see a culinary culture in general that has beer as such an integrated part of it. And wine is almost like non-existent. The UK is really great. I think the thing I like about the UK is cask ale. It's one of my absolute favorite things in the world. Cask conditioned beer, where they have these specialized kegs that breweries will fill essentially right from the fermenter. When it's done fermenting, they add a little bit of priming sugar into it, and it promotes a secondary fermentation in this keg that they're going to serve from. But the fermentation is kind of shepherded through by the people at the pub. So the publican is the guy who's like managing that fermentation, and they're like assessing carbonation, and then they tap it when it's finished. They tap it, and it's the freshest beer that's just so great. It's the what I like to call, and I didn't coin this term, somebody else said it, but it was it's like the freshly baked bread of beer. It's amazing.
And with that, it's different because you send it to different breweries, and the brewmaster is tapping it at different times. So
well, it's not the brewmaster that's tapping it. So the brewery sends it right to the retailer. And the retailer is, so imagine like a bartender at your local bar who's got a cellar full of all these fresh kegs he got from different breweries, and he's managing the fermentation of all these different breweries' beers, and then tapping it when it's done.
It could taste different from beer house, from bar to bar.
Yeah, it potentially could. And there's a lot of variability and quality out there too. It's a very delicate thing. And once it's tapped, it's only good for like maybe 48 hours or 3 days, like 2 or 3 days. That's it. Because the freshness goes down immediately. It's an amazing thing. You get fresh cask ale. It's just absolutely fantastic.
Is that only in the UK?
You really only find it in the UK. There's a handful of places in the US that do cask ale and do it the right way. There's a place in Denver called Hogshead, which they make they make English style ales, and they've got cask ale there, and they do a really fantastic job, and it's a pretty legit like cask ale brewery, but you don't find it a whole lot in the US.
Okay.
And then I kind of continue to kind of complete that thought. The US, I think the cool thing about what we've done here is, if you look at what beer culture was here 30 years ago, it was kind of a monoculture. It was one style of beer from a bunch of different breweries, and the only thing that was really different was the branding on the can or the bottle. And we've managed to create a beer culture in the US that's got probably the widest variety of styles and beers of anywhere in the world. And we have some of the most innovative brewers of anywhere in the world that feel like they don't have any rules, right? They're not bound by any type of tradition. Even in Belgium, where there's this wide variety of beers over there, when you talk to brewers over there, there's such a rich tradition of brewing that they oftentimes feel held back by that. Like there's, you'll visit an amazing brewery that's making beer and they've been around for 200 years, and they're like, this is the beer they make, right? And this is the beer we've always made, and this is the beer that we're always gonna make, right? And so they don't feel like they can innovate sometimes. Whereas in the US, it's just like, we do whatever the hell we want. And because of that, brewers from around the world are now looking to the US for inspiration, which didn't used to be the case. It's kind of a cool thing.
You know what I was just sitting here thinking about as he was talking? What makes a beer a known style? You know what I mean? Like, where did the IPA come from to make it like known that, okay, this is a certain style, then somebody created a stout, and now a stout's a style. You know what I'm saying? Like, is it a certain amount of people who got to make this type of beer, and now it's a known style, or is it just that, or a recognized style, should I say, or is it a different way that happens?
Well, yeah, the discussion of style in general is an interesting one. So, like in the class that you guys sat in on, we talked about the origin of certain types of styles. So these were just, beers that had a unique flavor profile that became really popular in a certain region because of the ingredients they used or the water content of that particular city, or whatever they decided to use, whatever people liked, and brewers made it. And so it became kind of a popular thing, either locally, regionally, or nationally, and sometimes internationally. And so a lot of these different traditional styles, like porter beer in England, or like Pilsner beer from the Czech Republic and then Germany, or like IPA from Burton-on-Trent in England. There's historical reasons why these beers started to be made. There's reason, and then because they were good beers, people drank them in large quantity, and they became kind of a thing. Nowadays, we recognize these traditional styles, but we're also kind of creating a lot of our own styles too. And as these styles evolved over centuries, sometimes you get these little offshoots of these like subcategories of styles. And then the way we talk about them are, there's kind of a common language that we use to talk about some of these. Like if I say, this beer's a stout, you have an idea of what that means. Yeah. Or if I say this is an IPA, you have an idea of what that means. It's like a common language that we use to talk about beer. And a lot of it comes from these historic styles. But then modern classification is more of there's a few different organizations that actually like keep and maintain written style categories. And the reason why these organizations do that is primarily for purposes of competition. So if you're entering beer into a homebrew competition, that competition is likely sanctioned by the Beer Judge Certification Program. Beer Judge Certification Program has, or we call it BJCP, has very detailed style guidelines for like 100 plus different beer styles. A lot of them are these like historic beer styles that have been around forever that we all kind of know about. And a lot of them are kind of subcategories of that, or offshoots that kind of grew out of those over the centuries. And they've classified them in a certain way. So when you enter a beer into competition, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's this beer, so we're not going to judge a porter up against a Pilsner. Right. That doesn't make any sense. So we're going to judge porters against porters. So they use those classifications for that. The Brewers Association also has their own style guidelines, and those are the guidelines they use for the Great American Beer Festival and for the World Beer Cup. And there's a lot of overlap, right? They both have American IPA and Porter and Imperial Stout and like all of the styles that we kind of know and talk about as like this kind of common language that we have. Both of those organizations have those styles in there. Now, the way they define them might have kind of different boundaries of the limits of what those styles are. And they also have like some other kind of subcategories or offshoots that the other one might not have, right? And it's just their own way of classifying it. But in general, like to really dive into, well, does this really fit into this category, or is it more this style or whatever? And you start discussing the finer points of it. Like a lot of that stuff, it doesn't really matter. Like if it's just us sitting around drinking beer, it doesn't really matter because we all kind of have the general descriptors as to what it is. Right. The really finer points of things matters more for sitting at a judging table when you're judging beers. Does this fit into the style category, or should it be in this other category? That's where you have more of those conversations. Okay. Or if you're taking and passing a Cicerone exam where we test you on the BJCP style guidelines, because those are the style guidelines that we pull from for our examinations.
Now is there reciprocity between BJCP and Cicerone, or do you have to be certified as BJCP as well?
So you, like in order to in order to judge in the competition? Right. Yeah. So I got recognized as BJCP. I took that test and recognized as like the lowest level of passing for the BJCP exam. I did that back in, I think, like 98. Okay. And then as you judge in competition in the BJCP section competitions, you get judging points, and then you can kind of move up the ladder. So I moved up to certified, but I moved up to certified by judging in BA competitions. So if you judge in BA competitions, you get BJCP points. So there's a little bit of crossover there.
Gotcha.
You know,
Gotcha.
and
So you got tenure.
yeah. And there is no like BA like test that you have to take and pass. BJCP has their own testing and certification process for their judges. The BA does not. But in order to get on the roster as a BJ or as a BA judge at like Great American Beer Festival and their competitions, you have to apply for it. You have to have letters of recommendation. You got to, you know, you have to have some credentials and you have to be approved.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. That's a
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so much.
Probably could ask a lot more questions. I don't know anybody else.
I think so. Like I said in the beginning, we are in this world. We like to know all we can know about beer.
It's so much.
I can appreciate
so much. Like he just runs off for like 5-10 minutes on a subject. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Give me more.
Get
Give
me
me more
going,
input,
man.
like Johnny Five from Short Circuit.
Johnny Five.
You get me going, man. I'll just talk and talk and talk.
Yeah.
My friends give me trouble about it sometimes because like
Nah, it's not even that. It's just like we ask a question and think it'd be like a 30-second answer, but it's so much more into it that you know.
And here I am sitting here. I can't even figure out how to add up, how to measure ABV or IBU.
Right.
That shit is hard.
Right.
well, you know, and that's the thing though, is like you know, don't be intimidated by like, you know, there's a ton of stuff to know about beer, right? You can peel away the layers and there's just and all you're gonna do is just uncover more. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know, right? There's just so much to learn. But what I tell people all the time, and I say this, and I find myself saying this when I meet somebody who is just getting into beer and they're wanting to learn more about it, and they're like, oh wow, you're Master Cicerone, and I'm like, well, like get a beer, and they're like, oh, I don't know what to say, and I'm like, don't say anything. I'm like, you're not like, my job is the one to like, you know, my job is to obsess over beer, right? Like beer's there to have fun, right? The whole point of people making beer, drinking beer, is because it's fun. It's a good time, right? So like, if you enjoy beer, then just enjoy it, right? If you want to learn more about it, cool. But there shouldn't be any intimidation about like beer knowledge, right? Beer's for everybody, and if you want to drink Bud Light and you love it, and that's how you enjoy beer, awesome. That's perfect, because that's what it's there for. It's for you to have a good time. And if you want to drink, you know, if you want to discover the world of beer and drink all these other styles, and all you want to do is just enjoy them and drink them and have a good time, kick ass. If you want to learn more about it, then that's awesome. And you know, I'm more than willing to help people learn however much they want about beer. Because if it helps them enjoy it more by learning more, that's great. But I make a real effort to not try and you know, be intimidating at all, right? It's like that's my job, to be obsessive and worry about all the details. Your job is just to have a good time and enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say if you're sitting at a bar and a first-time beer drinker came up and they're talking to you? How would you introduce them to a beer?
Well, I usually don't interject much if they're just ordering a beer and they're asking questions.
No. I'm asking you, like, if they're asking you, like, hey, I'm this beer
like
thing,
I don't drink beer, that kind of question.
Okay.
I want to start drinking beer. How would you talk to that person? What would you ask them to get?
Well, the first thing I would try and do is ask them. I would try and find out what they like. Like, what do you drink? Mm-hmm. And what, you know, if they're a beer drinker and they're looking for something different, well, what beer do you normally drink? And based on that, then, you know, you can make a suggestion that might be a good next logical step, right? Okay. So if they're an American lager drinker, well, you know, maybe they can step out a little bit. Maybe there's a beer on tap that's like a Pilsner from a craft brewer that has got a little bit more flavor. Or maybe, you know, there's something that's just just a step above where they can try some new flavors, but it's not too much of a leap, right? So, you know, if somebody's a Bud Light drinker and they're looking for something more flavorful, I'm not going to be giving them, you know, a super bitter double IPA because they're probably not going to like it. They're not going to be used to it. But if they drink pale ale and they're trying to step out a little bit, maybe I would, right? So the first thing I try and do is just find out what they like. If they don't drink beer at all, and they, you know, then I find out what they normally do drink, and then maybe find a beer that has some of those flavors that they already know and they already like.
No, because soon as that person say, "Oh, I just drink coffee all the time." Oh, here, taste this stuff.
Yeah, I've done that, and that's a fun one when you give somebody a stout beer and they say they don't like beer at all, but they drink coffee, and you give them a stout and they're like, "Oh wow, this is amazing! It's great." Yeah.
Now we probably could talk to you all day, but I wouldn't want to hold you too long. It's been about an hour and a half.
It has good time.
Hey man, when you're having a good time, time flies.
We should do a part 2 for Neil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do a part 2 for Neil and like talk about like maybe some, you know, some
other beer styles and some other. I mean, there's a lot of things about beer that you can. I mean, he is a master Cicerone.
He does know a lot about
Hey, I'm down for that, guys.
For sure. But so before we wrap up, we always like to know how people can reach you on social media or even the business as well, so you can give us that information.
Yeah. So my business, Craft Quality Solutions, you can go to sellgreatbeer.com. That's SELLGREAT. Some people misinterpret that as celebrate beer, but it's not. It's sellgreatbeer.com. That'll get you to my website. You can kind of see what my business is about and type of services that I offer. And you can scroll to the bottom of the page and sign up for my newsletter. I've been doing a weekly newsletter. I've only done a couple of them now, but I'm going to try and I'm going to be pushing this out every week is my intention. And it's just as a number of different relevant articles to the bar and restaurant and brewery world, a little bit of, you know, kind of draft tidbits and tricks because, you know, draft beer is kind of my deal. And just like a little bit of beer knowledge stuff thrown in there too. So kind of a fun newsletter. So go ahead and sign up for that. You can find me at Twitter at NWitte. That's NWITTE, N as in Nancy, NWITTE. You can find me on Instagram at NJWIT, NJ Witte. What else? Neil Witte on Facebook, Craft Quality Solutions on Facebook. I don't know what else.
No TikTok.
You don't have
No TikTok.
I don't have TikTok yet. I have a feeling if I did TikTok, I'd just be like yelling at people about beer quality for a minute.
everybody.
So you are Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah, I might turn into something like that if you gave me TikTok.
All right, Lou. What were you saying, Lou?
Huh?
What
You were saying something?
I said you can have your niche. That'll be your niche for TikTok.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
The beer man.
Never know. I'll be a TikTok celebrity by the next time I come
There
on.
you go.
Yeah.
There it is.
And today we have on the Angry Beer Man.
Oh man, don't tempt
Clean the
me.
glass.
That is not
Damn
beer.
glass.
That is not beer clean. I see bubbles.
Piss off!
Oh man,
Like
I think
the
there might be a
risotto.
market for that.
Right, it is.
Yeah, I think it might be.
Definitely have a niche. 15 seconds? 15 seconds cussing somebody out about beer? Yeah, that's a niche.
Yeah. All right, Lou, where can they reach you at, Lou?
For all your beer, first of all, thank you very much, Neil, for coming on. I appreciate you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, man. For all your beer needs, Lou Belgium. For all your t-shirt needs, In the Margin Tees. I am on them Instagrams.
Yo.
And you can find me, 302 Yoda, on Instagram and on Facebook and Instagram at Delaware on Grind.
Yeah.
And I echo Lou's comments. Thank you for coming on. I just also subscribe to sellgreatbeer.com, so I'll be looking for you and following you with all the latest and greatest news. But you can find me on Instagram at DevinAaron_the_great.
And you can find Bruising Banter Podcast at Bruising Banter Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And you can check us out and listen to podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Once again, we want to thank Neil Witte for coming through.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes.
We will have a
Great time. Great time.
At least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was awesome, guys. Very cool.
Yeah. This has been episode 72, Bruising Banter Podcast. Until next time.
Have a good week, everyone.
Happy Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers, everybody.